Once upon a time, there was a traveler. While he was going from place to place, he saw a magnificent palace. It's a good story so far, isn't it? The beginning of a great fairy tale. Perhaps the palace is a magical place where people live in luxury. Perhaps it's a palace the traveler can't wait to reach, to rest his weary legs and indulge himself in food and drink. But this is not the beginning of a great fairy tale written to capture our imagination. This is the beginning of a great midrash, a rabbinic legend written to inspire righteous living. And this Jewish text is painting a picture of a reality that is far more complicated than any fairy tale. Okay, I'll go on. Once upon a time, there was a traveler. While he was going from place to place, he saw a magnificent palace, but the palace was on fire. So this palace is not what we'd expect. It's now a place that this traveler is not rushing to, but rather gaping at, or even considering rushing away from. It is a beautiful place to be sure, but something is terribly wrong. Once upon a time, there was a traveler. While he was going from place to place, he saw a magnificent palace, but the palace was on fire. So the traveler said to himself, "Can it be that this palace has no owner?" The traveler is looking at a magnificent palace in flames, and he is seeking an explanation for it. How has something so precious been placed in danger of such imminent destruction? The hypothesis that he offers himself is that the one who should be taking care of the palace has left. Otherwise, reasons the traveler, that owner would have kept this fire from starting, or at the very least would be working to extinguish the flames. Once upon a time, there was a traveler. While he was going from place to place, he saw a magnificent palace on fire. So the traveler said to himself, "Can it be that this palace has no owner?" But then the owner of the palace leaned out and said, "I am the owner of this palace." Now the flaming palace, already a travesty, is revealed as a paradox. Not only is there a beautiful palace that is on fire, but there is indeed an owner who is actually dwelling in the palace. Upon revelation that the owner is home, but that the owner is not fixing the problem, the traveler's initial theory now disproven, he now has two choices: keep walking or develop a new theory in which this fire is a part of his responsibility. And the choice is his. But I have left out an important detail that is vital to know if we are to glean the wisdom of this rabbinic text, a detail that makes this midrash instructive for us today on Yom Kippur in Memphis, Tennessee. This midrash is our Jewish origin story. The story is actually about Abraham, our ancestor and the first Jew, and is a profound and radical explanation of what God means when God famously says to Abraham in the book of Genesis, "Lech lecha," go forth from the place you know to the place that you don't know, to a place that I will show you. This midrash is a parable about Abraham's decision to go forth into uncharted territory in order to launch this legacy that we embrace today. And to understand this parable and to hear its call, we must apply an analogy. The traveler as Abraham, the palace as our world, and the owner as God. The midrash concludes this way. Just like that traveler who stands before the flaming palace and asks about its owner, Abraham looks at the beautiful world, the world of blessing and goodness and majesty, witnesses its fires, the fires of evil and oppression and chaos, and asks, Is there no caretaker in this world? And God calls out from the flames, I am here. And this is the moment of truth. Abraham must decide whether to respond to God's call of Lech Lecha, to venture forth and live a different way. And this decision of Abraham's about whether or not to go is akin to the traveler who must decide whether or not to be responsible for the flaming palace. In other words, the astonishing claim of our rabbis is that this palace, this world on fire, is where God lives. God is home, but God is not putting out the flames. God is asking Abraham to be a first responder. And in the ellipsis of this midrash is the lingering, persistent, unspoken question, well, Abraham, what are you going to do? And that is how Judaism begins. Our religious inheritance is designed to prepare us for life's most difficult moments. And those moments are inevitably, as this midrash points out, when we become aware that what should be and what is are at odds. Moments when we become aware that the palace is on fire and that God is waiting for us to act. The essential moral challenge of our lives as Jews is our response to this kind of moment. And we, Temple Israel, in Memphis, Tennessee, in 2018, are facing a palace on fire. Many, in fact. And a God who is saying to us, well, Abraham, what are you going to do? The idea that we Jews have a role in healing the world is not new. Tikkun Olam is as familiar a phrase to many of us as Good Yontif or Manishtana. But the strong image of being invited by God to approach a fire in a palace of our world offers insight into why it is so challenging to translate that theoretical value into practical action, so challenging to push ourselves closer and closer to the source of the flames. The first and most obvious reason for our inaction or our underaction to a fire in the world emerges when we, like the traveler, are not inside the palace that is on fire, when we witness it from a safe distance away. We are, many of us, so very fortunate. So many of us do not live in poverty or anything close to it. So many of us are well-educated academically and well-connected socially and politically. And so many Jews are of European descent, and so, at least until our religious heritage is discovered, very few assumptions are made about us. These realities place us at a safe distance from the fires of systemic racism and the cycles of poverty it creates that plague our city, our state, and our country. The fact that 1 in every 2 African American children in this city is living in poverty is not a statistic that describes the reality of the majority of us. There are no laws that either by design or circumstance disenfranchise us from voting. Those of European descent do not have to sit their precious sons down and say to them, very soon, too soon, the world is going to stop seeing you as a child and begin to label you as a menace to society. You must conduct yourself with care lest someone call the police on you or, God forbid, become so afraid of you that they shoot first and ask questions later. When we, the travelers, are outside looking in, we must ask ourselves if we are willing to brave the discomfort of these kinds of flames, to take them on as part of our story, as part of our responsibility. To face them means to acknowledge that there is collective trauma that the descendants of the brutal system of slavery deal with on a daily basis, and that even to this day, there are systems set up that are either designed to treat African Americans unfairly or that are blind to the unique plight and pressures of that community. To address this fire means to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that these flames were started on purpose and were kept burning through centuries of calculated stoking. And to engage with them means to ask ourselves hard and unsettling questions about how we may be inadvertently continuing to give them oxygen. Questions like, are we honest about our own biases, our own fears, our own casual language and assumptions and judgment? Do we pay a living wage in our businesses and for our personal services? And are we asking that of the places that we patronize? Can we read and listen to the ideas of people who make us uncomfortable and defensive, staving off our own fragility in order to hear the truth? Are we passionately advocating for policies in our city and our state and supporting candidates and leaders, not because they promise protections of our own particular and immediate interests, but because they will dismantle the edifice that was initially constructed to keep white and black people apart and to silence African American voices? Yes, many Jews, though not all, are outside this blazing palace, shielded from some of its worst fires. But Judaism teaches that this is no excuse for ignoring the flames. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor, the Torah teaches. God is asking each of us, well, Abraham, what are you going to do? Another barrier to approaching the flames implicit in this midrash is the lack of specific instructions. Neither God nor any resident of this palace is offering the traveler an IKEA-like guide for how to help. And so it is understandable that the traveler might feel hesitant. There is risk involved. There is guesswork. There is trial and error, and that can be scary. Since the last time we gathered for a Day of Atonement, women from every industry and walk of life have begun to speak more openly about our experiences of being denigrated and harassed and even assaulted by powerful men. The Me Too movement has brought to light that the power dynamics of most offices and organizations and learning institutions, and yes, even rabbinical schools and Jewish congregations, have created a vulnerable situation in which those with the most power have felt free to objectify their female and sometimes male colleagues and acquaintances in ways that are humiliating and professionally damaging and emotionally and physically traumatizing. We have all been rocked and disoriented by the magnitude of this movement. We, the travelers, may very well see a fire such as this one, but feel hesitant about how best to put it out, especially because many of these instances are intimate and informal and take place between people of equal credibility and social standing. We may be unsure about whether the best way to put out this fire is to speak about it privately or publicly. We may not know if it is more effective to reduce the frequency of contact between men and women in certain settings or to increase it. For men who are unclear about acceptable behavior, whether it is better to be transparent about that bewilderment or to hide it and hope clarity comes with time, may be confusing. When facing a fire like the one being elucidated by the Me Too movement, are we travelers willing to take steps without a playbook? To take the chance of appearing foolish or too sensitive or too insensitive so that we can approach the flames? Are we sure the women that we work with and socialize with know that they can share their experiences with us? For the good men among us who are privy to locker room talk, do you call out other men who objectify women and act inappropriately toward us in your presence? Do we believe the women who confide in us And do we support them in ways that empower them rather than stifle them? And are we not only raising brave and beautiful and bold daughters, but also empathetic and ethical sons who are every bit as much feminist in their perspective as their mothers and their sisters and their rabbis? Yes, the way forward is uncertain, unstable, uncharted. But Judaism teaches that that is no excuse for ignoring the flames. Na'aseh v'nishma, we will act even before we fully understand, the Israelites declare. God is asking each of us, well, Abraham, what are you going to do? Another barrier to engaging with the flaming palace is perhaps the most challenging of all. These are big problems. The Midrash doesn't talk about a palace with a broken window pane or a few loose bricks. This is a fire, something unwieldy and unpredictable, something dangerous, something that no one person can fix alone. Fatigue, cynicism, and even worse, hopelessness can set in when we witness something so overwhelming as a palace in flames. Whose heart didn't ache for the innocent children at our borders this summer who were forcibly separated from their parents? Whose eyes don't tear up even now, thinking about the images of crying toddlers and replaying in our minds the recordings of their wails for their mommies and daddies? Who isn't haunted by that widely circulated video of the 3-year-old boy who had been so traumatized by the separation from his family that he didn't even recognize his mother when she finally reunited with him in Houston? She tries to hold him, and she cries, "I am your mommy." And then through her weeping, she says, "What happened?" Who isn't physically sick at the thought that there are still hundreds of children whose parents have been deported or lost track of, and for whom there is little hope that they will ever be reunited, and that these children have been permanently orphaned in our name? Even without knowing what we know about the lasting impact of childhood trauma, the crushing enormity of the tragedy of it all is nearly paralyzing. And the weight of the harsh reality is so heavy that it might feel like the best thing to do is just put it out of our minds entirely. When faced with the biggest fires, we, the travelers, must begin by asking ourselves, what is in our power to do? And sometimes, what is in our power to do is to find allies and work together, knowing that there is no switch we can flip, but rather we need a massive course correction that needs everyone rowing together with all our might. It was the public outcry of millions across our nation, many Orthodox, conservative, and Reform Jews and Jewish organizations among them, that drew attention to this crisis and ultimately curbed the policy of separating children and parents seeking asylum at the border. No, one voice couldn't do it, but a broad-based coalition could. And there is much work left to do as the crisis continues. When facing a fire that is too big for us to address alone, are we, the travelers, willing to reach out, to organize, to sit in new and unfamiliar settings with new and unfamiliar people in order to amplify our voices and our intentions? Are we willing to expand our circles of friendship and relationship beyond those we see every day, beyond our silos and our villages, in order to strengthen our capacity to respond? Are we prepared to put in time and effort that it takes to build a movement, something that will outlive us, planting seeds, the fruits of which we may never see? Yes, the road is long and the task is great. But Judaism teaches that this is no excuse for ignoring the flames. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin lihibatel mimena. It is not your duty to complete the work, but you are not free to desist from it, the Mishnah teaches. God is asking each of us, Abraham, what are you going to do? Once upon a time, God spoke to Abraham and said, leave everything you know and go to a place that I will show you, a place you do not know. Perhaps the place Abraham and all his descendants are called upon to travel toward is not a geographic location at all. Rather, it's toward a way of living our lives, a commitment to being in a state of constant confrontation with the pain that we might soothe, with the wrong that we might right, with the way we might grow and be better. It is a way of life in which the journey in the direction that our moral compass leads is the destination, an eternal choosing to encounter, to seek understanding, and to respond. This day of Yom Kippur is about teshuvah. It is about acknowledging where we've missed the mark. But teshuvah, like the palace in flames to which God is beckoning us, is also a paradox. Admitting that we have failures and blind spots and missteps for which we can repent necessitates a belief that we are essentially good and capable of change. The perspective of this day and of Judaism as a tradition is that growth is a part of life and that our past does not define our future and that we have limitless potential for more and more righteous living with every passing day and year. One of my favorite things about Judaism is that we are permitted and even encouraged to bring our own interpretations to the study table. And so here is mine. Yes, the palace in flames in which God resides is the luminous world that we have encroached upon by darkness. But the palace in flames is also the soul of each and every one of us. Yes, we fail and we fall and we consume and we ignore and we don't do enough. But our core is good and caring and beautiful and holy. And most importantly, God lives within us. Today, when we confront our own flames in all facets of our life, individually and as a community, and we ask, as Abraham did, is there no one who loves this palace enough to confront the flames? Let us remember that God leans out and God says, I am here. I believe in you. I see the best in you. I have seen your flames, and they don't scare me away. Trust yourself. Hear the call, and from wherever you are, take a step toward me. And may that be how our Judaism this new year begins. Can you hear Ratzon?